3, 2, 1.
Here we go!
Well, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Welcome in from across the continent and beyond for an exciting Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants broadcast. I want to do a special shout out in our YouTube chat to Sawyer here in Newfoundland with me and Caesar in Nicaragua. We've got two students that have been joining us all week long for some incredible programs, and it's just so nice to see you in the chat every single day. Now, you are in for a treat today because we are having an exciting program in such a wide variety of ways. Number one, February is our entire month dedicated solely to the most amazing women in science on planet Earth. We've got Egyptologists, paleontologists, Arctic experts, botanists, and more, but I'm so excited with who we're bringing in today because she joined us last year for our epic Wild Hope series. So Wild Hope showcases and celebrates the best conservation stories in the world. We did this epic 10-part series of them. We're doing another one this year, and as part of that, we got the chance to hang out with Madeleine Sherman at the Coral Resilience Lab. So what they do in Hawaii is help breed and then put coral back in the wild in a way that we're going to help with it to combat climate change in the future. So we're helping save coral reefs, one of the most iconic and important ecosystems on this planet, and we're doing it at one of the most special laboratories on planet Earth. So I'm just really excited you get to hang out with me as we get to learn all about it today. And without further ado, I'm going to stop talking, turn you over to Maddie. We are outdoors in Hawaii at the Coral Lab, and if there's a cooler intro line than that, I don't know what it is. So welcome to the broadcast. Flick on your mic, and so nice to see you again, Maddie.
Hi, thanks, Jesse. So welcome, everyone. So we are currently on Moku'olo'e on the island of Oahu in Kaneohe Bay. And Jesse, if you advance the slide, like I said, we're a little tiny island on part of an island chain. And our lab is very, very special because we're one of about 15 different research labs on this island, and we specialize in coral and understanding how corals are changing with climate change. So if you want to come a little bit closer, these are our beautiful organisms that we study. So this right here is our rice coral, our Hawaiian rice coral. It's found in Hawaii, and we do a lot of work on this coral right here because it is one of the dominant species in Kaneohe Bay, which is where we work. And so a lot of the work that we do in our lab has to do with coral reproduction. And so understanding how corals reproduce. So during the summer, we have these amazing events called coral spawning, where our scientists and our staff will go out into the field or into the lab, and we will actually collect the babies of these guys. But if you want to get a closer look, is that in focus? Can you see this okay?
That is beautiful. It's just incredible. I can't believe it's so clear.
Okay, so if we could take a closer look, you can see that this coral has all of these little dots around it. And these dots are the coral animal. So this is a coral polyp. And corals are made up of thousands or millions of these little coral polyps. And they kind of look like little sea anemones or little jellyfish. And that's because they're all related to each other. They're all cousins in the group Cnidarian. So these coral polyps, they have little tentacles and little stinging cells. And you can see they're really tiny here. But in some places in the world, they're much bigger. But here in Hawaii, our little coral polyps on our local corals are pretty small. But even though they're small, they're pretty complex and they're very mighty. So these corals, they make up large coral reefs. And like I was talking about the reproduction, that is the most exciting thing that happens in our lab. So what we do is during the summer, this coral specifically, during around the new moon, it will release these bundles, and they're bundles of gametes of the coral, so both the egg and sperm. And there should be a little video in there of this guy releasing some of those bundles. So what happens is these bundles will float up to the water column, and then they'll break apart, and then they can fertilize with a neighboring colony. And then they'll turn into these little coral larvae, and then they'll swim around for a couple of days. And then they'll look for a nice place on the reef to settle, and then they'll become these beautiful corals. And so in the lab, we can do that. And what we actually do is we can take parents of known genetic composition. So if we know that these parents are more resilient to certain stressors, we can actually take the babies from those corals, put them together, and then hopefully have a more resilient offspring. So that's where the resilience in our lab comes from, the Coral Resilience Lab. Let's zoom in a little bit more. So something that's really important to note about coral is you see how all of these are this nice color. We can look at the corals over here as well. So they all have this rich color to them. And that is because they have a symbiotic algae that lives inside of them. And this is called a zooxanthellae. So on your screen, you have a picture of a coral polyp, and all of those little red dots inside of that coral polyp is one little zooxanthellae. And the zooxanthellae are responsible for giving the coral its color. And so you can see here the Montipora or the rice coral. It's this reddish brown color. And then this coral over here, this is the endemic coral to Hawaii called the finger coral. And then over here we have our mushroom coral. I think I have a fun one I can show you here. Okay, get right there. This is our mushroom coral. So these corals, they have a relationship with these tiny little algae cells, and the algae is actually what gives it its color and most of the food that the coral needs to survive. So here in Hawaii, our corals, they rely on the algae to give them about 97% of their nutrition, and then the rest of the nutrition that they get is from feeding themselves. And so the zooxanthellae, they're photosynthesizing, meaning that they get their energy from the sun, and then they're sharing all of that energy with the corals. And there's a process that is called coral bleaching that sometimes you can see corals that appear white. Fortunately, we don't have any bleached corals in our tank that I can show you today, but there's some pictures that we can show you. So these bleached corals are what happens when the relationship between the coral animal and the algae, that relationship gets broken down. And this happens due to a number of different reasons, but the number one reason for this is because of climate change and ocean warming. So when the ocean gets warm, then the coral gets stressed out. And what it does is that relationship breaks down and the algae within the coral leaves, and the coral, we're just left with the clear tissues over the white coral skeleton. And so the coral appears to be bleached or white. And because it doesn't have the algae inside of it, it's losing a lot of its nutrition, and therefore it can lead to the coral, unfortunately, dying. But some of the times the coral can recover. And what we do in our lab is we are searching out for these resilient corals that can actually survive in these warmer waters. And I'm going to go inside and talk to you folks about the rest of this. So give me 1 second to transfer cameras, and I'll see you in a second.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. And while you're doing that, I'll just highlight again, if people want to check out the Coral Resilience Lab, they've got an amazing website. They've got a great social media presence, so you can check out all of the incredible work that they're up to all the time. And I can't stress enough, we did last year this amazing part of the Wild Hope TV series with them. So check out Wild Hope on YouTube. Check out wildhope.tv. Lots to explore and discover both on Maddie and her team's work and all sorts of other amazing conservation organizations. But truly, there's very few labs in the whole world that do work like the Coral Resilience Lab, and they're really pushing the boundaries of what we can do in the husbandry of creatures and in helping combat climate change's effects. And with that, it looks like Madeleine's back inside, so come on in and take us away.
All right. So hello again. I'm from the inside of the lab now, so we have a little bit of a better connectivity. So the really exciting thing about what we do in our lab is we have a stress testing facility, and this is one of the only places in the world where this exists. And so we have built this in-house, and our staff and our researchers have made this to do exactly what we want it to do. And it's really useful for our research because what we can identify is the corals that are more resistant to this bleaching. And these are the corals that we want to prioritize for our outplanting efforts. So you can see here on the screen in that bottom left photo, that is our stress testing facility. And so each tank is hooked up to a little computer box, and that box, we can program it to read exactly what temperature we want it to. And so the photo above, this is a short-term stress test, and you can see that curve. It goes from about 26 degrees Celsius all the way up to 32 degrees Celsius. And corals in Hawaii typically bleach around 28 and a half. So you can see like that purple, when it goes from blue to purple to red, the purple is the danger zone. And then up into the red is where they start to get uncomfortable. And so the photo on the right, you can see that those were the corals in the tank before the stress happened, while they were still in their normal ambient temperature. And then time point 10, so that is one of the last time points, you can see that there are some of those bleached corals, but then some of those corals, they still have some of their color. And so these are the corals that we deem more thermally resilient, meaning that they can survive in these warmer waters. And those are the corals that we want to understand, we want to research, and we want to know what makes them different. Next slide, please. And how we collect this data is we can do it a couple of different ways, but the more recent one that we have is we're using a machine called a PAM, or a pulse amplitude modulation. And so what happens is when we want to collect data from during our experiment, we can put them in this machine and it sends a flash of light through the coral, and then it collects the fluorescence of that coral. And so over time, we're able to see if it's losing its fluorescence, meaning the algae that's inside of it or any other material that would fluoresce inside the coral. And then we can track over time who is losing their algae, who's retaining their algae, and it gives us a really good quantification of who's doing what. And then after we've collected that data, we outplant everything, but we will prioritize the corals that are more thermally resilient, because our goal is we want to help enhance the overall resilience of a reef. And so by doing that, next slide, what we do is we have these events where we take our corals that we've collected and the ones that we've deemed more thermally resilient, we will actually fragment them into small pieces. So if you can see in the bottom left corner, that is one of our nursery tables that has all of those fragments on it. And the reason why we fragment corals is because when they are cut up into smaller pieces, they actually grow faster. So they know that they're small, and so they want to grow faster. And we do this because it covers more area in a shorter amount of time. And so after we've fragmented these corals, and you can see little fragments in the bottom middle and the bottom right picture as well, then our research divers will actually go out and put these onto the reef. And so you can see in the top two photos, we have our divers using these special marine glue guns, essentially, to secure that fragment onto the reef. And the person on the left is using a drill to make a little hole for that coral plug to sit in. And then the picture on the top right, that is where when you zoom out, you can see all of the little coral fragments that we've put back out on the reef. So those are all coral fragments that we have identified as being more thermally resilient. And so the whole purpose of this is that we want to ensure that we have corals into the future. And since climate change and ocean warming is such a big threat, we want to essentially have insurance for our reefs by putting these corals out there. And then we do this monitoring using what we call structure from motion photogrammetry. And so you can see the picture on the left, that is an entire plot of corals that we have monitored. So that's about a 12 meter diameter in that circle. And so that's a big reef right there. And we can go in with a computer and identify all of the little outplants that we've put out there and track them over time. So we go out about every 4 to 6 months and look to see how the corals are doing. And then on the picture on the right, these corals you can see have grown probably about 10 times their size. I know it doesn't look like it, but 3-dimensionally, they have grown about 10 times their size. And this is an old photo, but even now they're even bigger. And then we just monitor so that we make sure that the corals that we're going back to, they're doing exactly what we want them to do. They're growing, and then the whole goal is so that they reproduce and are able to spread their genetics and spread their babies elsewhere, because our research has identified that thermal tolerance is something that can be passed down to your offspring. And so that's why we do a lot of the reproduction work in our lab as well. So I know that was a lot. There's a lot of sciencey terms and everything. But if anyone has any questions, I'm super happy to answer anything, talk some more about corals and science. If you want to pull up some more pictures, if anyone has questions about that, feel free. But the floor is open.
Maddie, that was the best whirlwind 15-minute inside-outside tour of all time, and the amazing work that you do. And I want to stress for our kids, I mean, one way you can think about it is we took wolves and we bred them into all the dog breeds in the world that you can think of today. Everything from a German Shepherd to a Chihuahua all came from wolves originally. And so we're doing a similar process in selectively breeding these corals. We're trying to find the ones that are the best able to withstand the changing ocean that we're making, and we're putting them back. And it's really, really, again, honestly, for me, I get the chance to hear about a lot of conservation research, and this is one of the most exciting and coolest things that's happening in the whole world. So I'm actually jealous of your job, and I'm very seldom jealous of jobs. So lucky you, and I'm so glad we got the chance to feature some of this. We've already got a bevy of questions. Please do keep them coming in the chat, everybody. Easy or very hard one. What is your favorite part of your job? No pressure at all.
Ooh, I think I have two favorites. So probably my most favorite, and this is going to sound very cliche, is that I love the field work that we have. You know, that makes like all the computer work that we do worth it. I think going out and actually getting to dive, that's probably my most favorite part, because, you know, that's the whole reason that I became a marine biologist. So actually getting to, you know, get paid to go diving, to be out on the reef, of course, in Hawaii with beautiful weather. Yeah. So that's definitely like up there. And then my other favorite part is I really love connecting with community. So like what we're doing today. And I love sharing my passion with other people. Because for me, all it took was, you know, I had one science teacher back in middle school who introduced me to environmental science. And that's all it took, was one really amazing teacher. And so I just hope that I can be that person for other people and getting to share my passion and what I do, and hopefully inspire other people. And who knows, maybe more people will want to become marine biologists.
Listen, I'm a grown man with a dream job, and I want to drop everything to come dive in Hawaii and do coral stuff. So you're inspiring me, much less our kids. And I want to stress for our kids, I'm so glad you mentioned diving. So, Maddie, you do lots of scuba diving in your job. We're lucky to feature a bevy of people that do that. Kids, at 8 years old, you can start on the path to being a scuba diver. It's called Paddy Bubble Maker. It's just working in a pool, getting to use the scuba tank for the first time. By 10, you can be an open water diver. So you can have the same certification that I do at 32 by 10 years old, and you can start on the path to being like Maddie and working underwater for a living. So very, very cool, accessible to anyone, no matter where you live on this planet. There are dive shops pretty much. So I encourage you to take a look at that. It's a lot of fun.
Start early.
Start early. I mean, it means you get more time underwater, and like 70% of the world is ocean. So you might as well get out exploring, I think. We had a great question about what affects corals. You talked a lot about heat and these thermal stresses. And so Caesar wants to know if it's just heat that affects them, or if there are any other factors at play that maybe cause bleaching or anything else for the coral reefs.
Yes, such a great question. So although thermal stress or heat is it's a global cause of coral bleaching, there are local stressors as well. So here in Hawaii, we experience a lot of sedimentation, meaning that the sand and all of the stuff on the bottom of the ocean can sometimes get stirred up, and then it'll actually cover the coral, and then it'll prevent it from getting adequate sunlight. So sedimentation is a big one. Runoff and pollution is another big one. So everything is connected. Even if you live all the way in the plains in the middle of the continent, what you do is affecting what happens in the ocean. And so pollution is a big one. Chemicals from runoff. So if there's a big storm and you have, say, you use pesticides for your garden or other sort of chemicals that you're using on land, if there's a big rainstorm, then all of that is going to get washed out into the ocean if there's not proper mitigation techniques. And so that's a big one, because all of those extra nutrients that are in the water can go out into the ocean, and it can cause things called algal blooms, where the opportunistic algae that grows really, really fast and outcompetes with coral. If there's lots of nutrients, it's loving that. And so it's going to grow and grow and grow, and it might smother the coral.
Yeah.
That's another big one.
We see that in the Gulf of Mexico a lot, where there's just so much algae that has sort of stifled a lot of the other ecosystems there. It's one of the bigger challenges in that body of water. So I'm really glad we got that question. Thanks for that. Maddie, this is the ideal question for you, given how you ended the talk. Miriam wants to know, she wants to be a marine biologist. She's in grade 5. What's the one piece of advice you would give her at 10 or 11?
I would say stay passionate and do what, like, if something interests you, read about it, watch videos about it. I think the more that you learn and the more that you educate yourself, it's going to open up more opportunities for you. So if you're interested in marine biology, like, definitely watch some documentaries, read some books. I know that there's some great shows. And then when you're old enough, maybe in high school or even middle school, there's probably some classes that you could take through school. So like, I had a environmental science class that I mentioned in middle school that I took. And then in high school, I was able to take oceanography and marine biology, and that just really helped solidify my passion. And then another thing that you could do is get out into your community and see if there's any sort of volunteer opportunities that you can do, and get involved in the science and in any, like, go to the aquarium, anything that you can do to help fuel your passion and keep that passion burning.
I will say, just because I'm from near Peel region originally, for Miriam, if you go to Ripley's Aquarium of Canada and if you go to the University of Toronto, there's all sorts of amazing marine biology things happening there, and they would love to have a student in grade 5 come and visit and ask them about what they do. I also can't stress enough, Blue Planet 2, you talked about documentaries, Maddie, is the best single documentary series ever, certainly on the oceans, but might just be generally. It is so, so good. And Smithsonian Ocean was a book that I read as a boy about your age that really, really inspired me about ocean wildlife. So I'm so glad. Great messages. Thank you for that, Maddie. All right, let's see what else we've got. Oh, you talked about this a little bit, but if you could explain a little more about how the zooxanthellae come back after a bleaching event. Like, is there a certain time limit for that they have to come back by? Do they all come back? Do some of them come back? Anything you can share to flesh that out?
Yeah, so it might seem like it's a very simple thing, but the relationship between the coral and the algae is very complex. And so the algae live within their tissues. And certain corals are able to host certain types of this zooxanthellae. And we actually don't know if when a coral is bleached, we still don't know if the coral is getting rid of the algae or if the algae is leaving. That's still an unanswered question. So maybe all of you, when you become marine biologists, can help us answer that. But the process is it can take some time, and not all corals are going to be able to actually recover and regain their algae. But you can kind of think of it as this, it's called endosymbiosis, where it basically like engulfs something within its tissues and is able to regain it from its environment and its surroundings. So there are different labs in Australia, for example. They do a lot of work on the symbionts or the zooxanthellae specifically, and so they're looking in how like the coral can regain the symbionts. But yeah, it's able to, once the stressor has been taken away and the coral decides that it's ready to recover, if it can recover, then it is able to get more symbionts from its environment, or the symbionts already within it is able to reproduce and regenerate.
Super cool. Thank you for the nuanced answer. We have one about your job specifically. When did you start doing it, and who do you get to work with in your job? You highlighted a little bit of an Australian lab, so I'm curious if you partner with them in any way or what the deal might be.
Yeah, so when did I start? I guess I technically started this job 4 years ago, but I actually started working in this lab about way longer than that. So in 2018 is when I had my first internship during my undergraduate. And so that was the first time I got to actually work out on Maunalua Bay at the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology. And I was doing stuff with coral. And that really solidified my interest in wanting to do coral research. But I started working in the Coral Resilience Lab about 4 years ago. And I have been loving it ever since, obviously, sharing my passions. And then what was the second part of your question?
The second part is, who do you get to work with in your job? Is it just folks in Hawaii? Do you get to partner with other labs that do similar work?
Oh yeah. So like I said, I love working with community members. So I love working with people here in Hawaii. That's like my main goal, is empowering communities here. But we do have a lot of collaborators outside of Hawaii that, we share knowledge and we get to know each other's research. So we do have people that we work with in Australia that I mentioned at the Australian Institute of Marine Science. We have people all over the US that we collaborate with. Like, we have researchers that will work both in our lab and also in someone else's lab in like LA, for example, or Pennsylvania. And we have a lot of collaborative projects around the world as well.
Yeah, we've talked to the folks in Australia before, and that's the only other comparable lab that always jumps to mind whenever we have the chance to bring you on. It's such a special place as well. Maddie, we got one from Miss Riddle's class. Man, we're getting all the all-star students in classes today. Does coral exist in all coastal areas? So anywhere there's a coastline, is there coral or no?
No, I would say. So corals, they like to live in those tropical and subtropical regions. So if you look at a map of the world, kind of like that center line is where you'll find most of the corals. There are some places in colder places that do have corals, but they look very different than the corals that we have in the tropical regions.
Yeah, I always heard it described, certainly when I was coming up at the aquarium, about 2% of the world's oceans are coral reefs, and they have about a third of all the life in the oceans in and on them. So they're incredibly biodiverse, rich areas, and they're just such special places. But they're not everywhere. I can tell you, off the coast of Newfoundland, where I am, we might have some cold water corals, but certainly not big reefs. It is largely just rock and anemones, endless amounts of anemones. So great question. Let's see what we've got here. Okay. Is there a maximum limit for coral? You talked about 26 to 32 degrees. I mean, for what it's worth, 28 degrees for water Celsius is really, really warm water. Like most of our audience today, certainly our Canadian friends, will never have been in water that is that warm. But is there a limit to that? Is there a limit that water gets to in general that you can speak to?
So I can only speak to corals in Hawaii. That's where my knowledge is. But so we have found that corals are able to live in those really high temperatures, like 32. They might not live a very long time, but we actually did a very long-term experiment where we had a eight-month-long stress test, and we were looking at future ocean conditions all the way to the end of the century, and temperatures got up to 35, I think. And while there are very few survivors of that, there were some corals that were able to withstand that.
What a fun test. I mean, such an interesting test. Terrible to think that we get to 35-degree waters, but wild. Huh. I like these ones. So how long you've talked about working there for a few years now, since 2018 from intern. How long did it take you to pick up all the pronunciations of everything? Because you've done a very good job, at least by our reckoning. So we're curious.
Well, I grew up here in Hawaii, so I all of the like Hawaiian names and all that stuff. But scientific names and whatnot. I mean, yep. I was kind of a nerd in college, so I think. Yeah, I was a nerd in college, so I was always watching nature documentaries in my free time, and I loved reading my textbooks outside of school hours. Yeah. So, I mean, I think I got pretty used to it pretty quickly, but I think I learned the most definitely doing my job. But I mean, once you know how to pronounce certain things like Latin names and scientific names, and you hear it all the time, then it just
nature.
Yeah.
By the way, thank you for calling yourself a nerd. We have the most nerds at Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants of any other organization in the world bringing people on, because almost everyone we have was just that obsessed kid, especially with nature and wildlife and swimming and all things beyond. So, kids, if you are that kid in class, way to go.
Yeah.
Someone from your slide earlier, you highlighted where you work on this fantastic island. How do you get to work every day? Do you live on the island? Do you take a boat? What's the deal? You swim?
Great question. No, I ride my dolphin. No, great question. So we take a boat to work. We have a little Boston whaler, and it's kind of like our shuttle van that we get to take. It's a 2-minute boat ride from our pier over to where we work. And it's very special getting to work out here because a lot of people don't get to come out, and so when they do, it just reminds me of how fortunate I am to get to work at such a amazing, special place like this.
Very, very cool. How neat is that? All right. Sophia wants to know, what's the coolest part about doing coral research?
Ooh,
I know. No pressure.
Artist. I think the coolest part of my job is, even though it might be small, just knowing that I feel like I'm making a difference in the world. These animals are so important for our ecosystems, and even just having the knowledge that I have about what they are, I love that I'm able to make a difference in that sense.
That's a very great answer. And I will say, for our audience's sake, and I'm not just saying this to flatter you, Maddie, I promise, even by the standards of other amazing conservationists, like the work that the Coral Resilience Lab does is so tangible, concrete, usable all over the world. Like, it's super, super neat stuff. It's the upper echelon of how cool you can get in conservation, where you are making a very positive difference in the world every single day in your work. So good for you. Let's see. What's the oldest coral? We've never had this question in all the coral broadcasts we've ever had. Tell us more.
I think someone did ask this the last time.
Oh, did they? Oh, ignore me. I'm lying, guys.
Everyone asked this, and I know that they just discovered a coral that is still living that was about 4,000 years old.
Cool.
And it was, yeah. I have to. Yeah, if you look, I'm sure if you look into that, it'll.
How do you tell the age of a coral, out of curiosity, for someone who might not know?
That's a good question that I actually don't know the answer to. I would imagine it's some sort of molecular testing, DNA testing. Yeah, but I have no idea how they would do that.
I wonder if it would. Does coral grow in a way that you'd have rings like a tree? Like, does it have a growth season and then like a not growth season where it would be clearly delineated, or no?
No, at least the corals that I know about don't have. Yeah.
Yeah. I will say, too, I had forgotten about this in advance of the call, but your question reminded me. They found the largest coral in the world ever, like 4 or 5 months ago, on an expedition we've been following. So Pristine Seas has been going all around the world, and they found this just monstrosity of a coral reef. It's just an amazing, amazing thing. I'm going to try and find it for you guys, send it along in our post-event email. Maddie, time flies and you're having fun. Is there any final message about the Resilience Lab, about coral research, about anything that you'd like to leave us with before we say farewell?
Well, thank you guys for listening. I just want to say, if this is something that interests you, stay passionate, and do some research on your own. Read books and different articles and stuff. And always, if something interests you, find ways to tackle that and to get into it and become more passionate. And I love sharing my knowledge with everyone, and I hope that everyone learned something. And even though you might not have corals in your area, I hope that you have a special connection to corals and understand how amazing they are.
No better message than that. I hope that our kids that are near coral reefs get the chance to explore them. If you're not in an area with coral reefs, like some of our Peel Virtual School team, get outside, get out there, go on vacation if you can, and see them firsthand. It's one of the most magical things you can do on this planet to swim on a coral reef, like Maddie gets to do almost every day. So with that, we'll say farewell to our audience. Thank you so much for joining us again, Newfoundland and Nicaragua today. Have a wonderful day. Bye for now, guys. Thank you all.